So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're excited to be here to share with you some information regarding the reopening here of our school here next week. And I am fortunate to be joined here with some very key people on our school. We have Paul Sally, Superintendent, Paul Waechtler, Principal on the Northfield campus, and we have Tim Hayes, Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, and then the two pictures that you see, Peter Tragos and Nikki Dizon, Assistant Superintendent Peter Tragos, Academic Services, and then Nikki Dizon, Communications Directors, are standing by here helping us with some of these questions. So we are recording tonight, so we'll place this on our principals page and back to school page. So it'll be posted tomorrow morning on the website. So one of the things tonight that we're looking at covering is just talking about what it means to be a large comprehensive high school and the reopening. We're going to discuss the reopening ladder, talk a little bit more about what remote learning will look like for our students here, what are some of the student supports that we have in place, and then certainly time for a Q&A. So one of the things that we've talked about at our board meeting and several of our other meetings is just this idea of being a very large high school like New Trier and some of the unique challenges that we have in terms of trying to reopen under some of these guidelines and restrictions and adhere to the social distancing guidelines, just understand that capacity limit of 50 in certain spaces. And then how do we continue to make sure that we're being efficient in our contact tracing and in just the complexity of student schedules, just thousands of students and lots of different choices and opportunities for our students that creates very complex schedules that we want to make sure our kids get the best schedule and the schedule they like, but it just creates a lot of unique challenges for us when trying to reopen and reopening in small groups. This here, I'm going to show you just a couple pictures. This is an example of what one of our new classroom looks like in the new building and what you would typically see in a classroom, how kids are seated in this particular room and in close proximity, that they are in a typical classroom at New Trier here. This picture here is just some hands-on, some classes that we have where it's really imperative that kids are actually in the room with the particular equipment and materials that they have. And then this is just we're fortunate that we have, many opportunities for kids to be part of extracurricular, and we get really big crowds that like to come, but just managing some of our athletics and extracurricular programs as well, and thinking about how do we do that when we reopen. And I think a great example was this summer with our athletic department and Augie Fontanetta working with our staff, just really trying to create the best opportunity for our kids that's safe and allows them to maintain that extracurricular program. So this is just an example of our summer conditioning that we had. That's over on the Northfield campus this summer. And then another great example is Lanyap. I think we're in our 77th year of our Lanyap production, and they've been planning since last spring when we went into remote learning, and this is an example of how they are continuing to have that program while maintaining the practices and guidelines to make sure that they're doing so in a safe environment. So Paul's going to share with you now the reopening letter, and some of this was shared as well as at our board meeting recently. But just now, how do you take all of those unique situations that we're in, and then what is our plan in terms of why we are at remote, and then how we'll transition?
Right. Thanks, Denise. And those pictures and being around school this summer and seeing kids around was great. And we know that the kids really enjoy being part of the school in whatever way they can. And really, when we think about being able to reopen the school, I think that the way we've approached it is through this ladder, is phasing in so that we can be careful and thoughtful about bringing staff on campus, bringing students on campus, and then more students on campus, and really assessing along the way how we're doing and are we able to keep staff and students safe, as they go about their day in this large high school with so many different opportunities and a lot of kids and staff around. We'll talk a little bit more about the Reopening Advisory Board in a minute, but that's one of the, that's a group that'll help guide us along this with their perspective and expertise in terms of making recommendations and giving perspective on how things are going. You know, I want to talk a little bit about, on the next slide, are some of the benefits of our ladder and our ladder approach. And the first one is that we want to be able to look at metrics, and we know that there are actually a lot of metrics that we need to think about. So some of the metrics are certainly the status of the virus in our community, in our larger community, in our county as well. That's the way the state breaks down their analysis. The other metrics we need are operational metrics around the school as we start to bring in staff and as we start to bring in students. Are we able to keep public social distance in the many spaces that we have? Are we able to manage bathrooms and lunch the way we think we can? So, so that's going to be an ongoing evaluation, and that's what the ladder allows us to do. And really, keeping a path open to in-person instruction was just critical. That we know there are going to be a lot of ups and downs throughout the year, but we want to know that we have an established way that we can move into in-person experiences for students, in-person classroom instruction for students. So that's really the goal of the ladder. The idea behind the advisory board and these metrics and our assessment is to be transparent to the school and community what we're seeing and what the prospects are for the future. I think it's important for all of us to be able to plan as best we can with all the unknowns that are in front of us. The other approach is we really, especially early on, want to establish some really good teaching and learning routines. So certainly I'll talk about the schedule for in just a little bit, but for the first few weeks, we'll be in that remote environment, allowing teachers to establish themselves both as teachers in relationships with their classes and then also in terms of being in the building and understanding the processes and procedures there. And then finally, the extracurricular opportunities are just so important in terms of the way that our kids can connect to the school. So we are continuing to work on and offer a robust extracurricular opportunities, and that's at any point, because that's one way we know we can safely engage students, and we'll be doing so. So just a little bit more about metrics. I know I talked about that. But there are a couple different categories of metrics. So more specifically, let's make sure I cover this. So certainly our positivity rate, as well as the number of cases per 100,000 in, again, our local township, our larger community, which would be where many of our staff live, as well as where many of our families are interacting. We're not just in our small 4 zip codes in our township. So that's one of our metrics. Staffing is another metric. We'll talk a little bit about that when it comes to quarantining. We have staff who certainly need accommodations and need to be able to teach from home in order to be safe, as well as, of course, students who need to be at home in order to be safe. The operational metrics I talked about a little bit. Supplies and facilities, another one. Do we have the levels of PPE? And then finally, of course, current science, the research and the on-the-ground developments that our healthcare providers are seeing around the area. And that sort of brings us to the next piece of the Reopening Advisory Board. And the Reopening Advisory Board is meant to bring multiple perspectives to the table to make sure that we're hearing what the experience is like for parents and students, for people, for various staff members and employee groups. Those are teachers, our support staff, as well as our physical plant services staff. A Board of Education member will be on there, as well as a number of administrators. That little asterisk there is also an important point, that we are coordinating carefully with all of our elementary districts in the township. We're doing this together and working on all this together because I think that that coordination is really important for our families. And then we have our experts, our medical consultants that will be on as well, providing us information again of the latest research, of what they're seeing on the ground, of what the metrics should be telling us that we're looking at, and those thresholds that we'll be setting. And those include infectious disease and infection control, pediatrician, as well as mental health. We think is very important to have as part of this reopening advisory board, mental health professional. So that board will be working on an ongoing basis using the operational reports that we have, as well as the metrics that are available to think about where we should be on the ladder. So speaking of the ladder and speaking of sort of opening school and our target, the next slide shows our target, sort of our target 8-week calendar. And it's, this is just where we need flexibility from everybody. And we know that things throughout the year may shift, but I think it's important for us to set targets for us to make sure we're ready, and for us to have a plan to ramp up to what it would mean to have kids in school and more kids in school, and then kids traveling the hallways to go around to all kinds of different classes. And so you can see here that starting from week 1, our students will be remote with the first day instruction of August 26th. As we move through weeks 2, 3, and 4, we are bringing our staff in to the building to understand what the protocols and practices are around the building, making sure we're well prepared for when students come in to the building, which we're targeting as the week of September 21st, building up the number of students that are in our building to the point where on October 5th, if the metrics look good, and the building's ready and all that we'll be able to have 25% of our students in classrooms on any given day. And then we'll continue to move forward and watch the situation and see how we're managing. We will talk a little bit later about quarantining, which is just an important part of the public health and the safety of our community. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that impacts any one of these metrics in terms of staffing and how many students have to be remote based on quarantine situations that might come up. So a little more information on that later.
So Paul, just real quick here, because there was a question there and I thought it just relates to right now. So, earlier I started out by talking about the challenges of a large high school and being able to bring kids back. Yeah. And so part of our at one point, in July, we talked about starting out hybrid. Yeah. And then, now we've gone to starting out remote. Can you just talk a little bit about that shift in our thought process and why?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we originally had just the first 3 days of class remote, and then started to move into sort of the hybrid, having students on campus. And I'd suggest that that was a little bit optimistic in terms of our ability to bring even our staff on campus. Many of you out there are maybe transitioning back to your own workplaces, and bringing 700 faculty into the building at one time is something that we needed to spread out in order to do it safely, in order to make the modifications that might be necessary for when students are on campus. Second is actually, I think that the consistency of establishing instruction within those first few weeks is important, so that our teachers and our students can establish a rhythm and routine. So that's the benefits that we get from extending it. In addition, we certainly hope that as the whole community sort of starts to get back into learning mode, we're certainly aware that we want our students, families, teachers to abide by all the rules of social distancing and the like. And so we think that giving a few weeks in which for students to be remote is helpful in that way as well. Now, this is a little bit longer than you normally would need for that. But again, that's to get the consistency of instruction and to have our faculty and staff understand the building and make sure we're ready for students.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, I'm going to talk through the slides. So good to see everybody this evening. You know, what we did in the spring of 2020 when we very quickly transitioned to remote learning, and what's going to happen in the fall of 2020 are going to be significantly different. So we're going to have high quality teaching and learning going on a daily basis, kind of what everybody would expect from New Trier. Let me highlight a few of the biggest areas of those change. So in the spring with the curriculum, you know, we had a very reduced curriculum, limited introduction of new concepts. And as we transitioned, we realized we need to go through, what does this course look like? How can we make sure students who experience this full year of course are prepared for the next course in that sequence? It's going to be rich and rigorous, and the pace is going to feel substantially different than it did in the spring. Assessments were pretty limited in the spring. We obviously can't transition all of the assessments we would usually have into a remote or hybrid environment, but teachers have been thinking and experimenting with alternative assessments, authentic assessments, things that translate well to a remote and hybrid environment, and that will certainly go into the next part where grading is going to be very different. So we had a do no harm. You could kind of only increase your grade in the spring. Here, obviously, everybody's starting kind of with no grade. And so the maybe catchphrase would be normal grades in abnormal times. We are going to be grading and assessing students throughout the year and giving them feedback to help them improve, but certainly handing out a grade at the end of each semester. Our online courses, we had many teachers using Canvas before, but during the spring we had every single teacher, but that was a very rapid transition. Here we've had time to set some standards, make sure there's some consistency so it's easy to navigate for students. We've also had obviously just a lot more time to prepare. So our teachers have done an amazing job with professional development, thinking over the summer so that we are going to have a very different look to remote learning, how we use Canvas as we enter this fall. We will also have, if you remember, we kind of switched around the schedule and synchronous versus asynchronous learning. Here we're going to have consistent daily contact for classes using Zoom or other communication tools during a scheduled time. And so that's teacher-student contact's going to look different for each class. And the instructional modes, again, our teachers have done a great job with their professional development. We as a school have done a great job creating kind of standards of practice. What's the best way to keep them engaged? We obviously don't want 70 straight minutes of Zoom. So how do you chunk that up with different activities, different things, and have the whole class together, maybe then other smaller groups that teachers meeting with to break that up and really make it effective for that instruction. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Denise. And then just talking about what does robust remote learning look like. Again, if you remember asynchronous, we had sometimes during the spring, a student might just log in, be told to do an assignment, check this, but he's not directly interacting with the teacher at the same time, nor with his peers. Moving that to synchronous instruction, following a schedule, having the class together, and allowing us to deliver that content is going to be really important. The other parts of this that we have is more for our teachers, but just to show you lots of what we've been thinking about. So we have remote learning standards of practice, talking about what the best practices are and what we've learned from all we've read and done research on to keep kids engaged, keep giving them feedback, and having them improve throughout the year. We have our Zoom standards of practice, which apply both to teachers and students. So we need students to have a good workspace. They need to have their camera on so the teacher and their peers can see them. The teacher has kind of best practices of how to break things up, and Denise will be going over a little bit more of that. And then the student workflow guidelines apply specifically to our Canvas. What's the easy ways for kids to get the information, submit work, get feedback on that work without spending all of their time just navigating technology. So we've really kind of improved that workflow. Go ahead to the next slide, Denise. So kind of more on hybrid learning and teaching. So as we transition and get into hopefully some students in class and we're in person, I think a key to all of this is all of this success depends on a really strong, robust remote learning course and then building from there. So the in-person instruction will help us build relationships. We know how important those are to our students with their teachers and with their peers. It will help us maybe do some hands-on learning, whether that's in applied arts or science, and certainly give some one-on-one help. So our effective hybrid learning, again, we need to have a great way to communicate with kids and what they're doing. So we're going to use Canvas for that. We're going to do, again, the best practices to make sure students have a great learning experience remotely. And then as we bring them in, we can enhance that with some additional technology and other things that we're doing. And so we're looking forward to getting to a hybrid spot where we have kids in class to get all of the benefits of that. This also allows us to transition if we have to go from remote to hybrid, which is quite frankly a strong possibility in both directions throughout the year. We can do this more seamlessly, and we know our teachers will be able to prepare for that in a strong way. Go ahead and go to the next one. I do want to go over kind of what different things might look like. And so this picture here, the blue is the teacher. The black figures are the students in the class, and then purple are the students at home. So at any given time in hybrid, you might have a teacher who's in front of the students. They have a camera or Zoom that is then giving that instruction also to the students at home who are watching and following the exact same lesson. So we're not going to have, a teacher doing 2 or 3 lessons per class, but it'll be 1 lesson for the groups regardless of where they're at. And then also the obvious benefit of the teacher being able to interact directly with those students right in front of them, give one-on-one help, maybe a little additional enhancement. We will also, as Paul said, have teachers who might be teaching at home. So there could be a room full of students who are also just watching a video of the teacher as the students at home are also doing that same thing. So we're going to have to use a variety of different things based on our staffing and where they're at. But again, we've been going through all of this to make sure that the students are getting a good experience in any setting they have, but certainly enhancing it when we get a chance to bring them on the campus.
Thanks, Paul. So some of the information Paul was sharing regarding Zoom, and I see there's been some questions that are coming in on Zoom. And, so some of this professional development was done over the summer just on best access of Zoom. And that was with Peter Tragos in his office, and they developed what we call the Zoom Classroom Standards of Practice for students and teachers. And it just really is a way for us to make sure that we're using Zoom the most effective way with our students in terms of the one-way communication and lectures and presentations. We think it's really important for our students to have as many touch points as possible. However, now with a block schedule in 70 minutes, we just don't think students sitting on for 70 minutes, all day long is really that beneficial. And so there's a question in there, I think, about will all teachers use Zoom? Most of our teachers will be using Zoom, and how long will students be on? We've really asked for teachers to really think about flexibility, what works best with your curriculum, and making sure that we're not giving our kids Zoom fatigue. So I think one of the things that it's really important for our parents to really understand is, if your student's not on Zoom for the full 70 minutes, a teacher may be providing some additional work for that student to do. That doesn't mean that they're not learning. It just means that they've shifted the way in which they're engaging that student in learning. We do want to be really mindful of our students on computers all day long. And so asking for teachers to really enrich that course by trying to do multiple different activities with students. Then the second part of this is, let me just see if there it is. So just really talking about what does it mean to have that remote learning and working with our staff on, just that idea when you're meeting with your kids in that Zoom, building relationships, really making sure that they're designing effective Canvas courses at work, the routines that they have with students, thinking about feedback. So these are some of the other things that were done over the summer with professional development with our teachers in thinking about what are the best ways that we can deliver our curriculum over a remote instructional method. So as Paul mentioned too, Canvas, last year we were just getting started with Canvas. But again, over the summer, this was some of the work that our teachers engaged in. And our IT did a spectacular job of really helping our teachers develop a standard for what we believe would be most beneficial for our students. We know that some of our students with executive functioning, just all students, when they go from teacher to teacher to teacher and they're having different access points of how they receive their information and materials, feedback. So there was a lot of work over the summer with Peter Tragos and his committees that really looked at how we can best support our students using Canvas and trying to create some consistent experiences, as I said, just how the communication works with the teacher on pushing out information and collecting information. And so one of the pieces that I'll share with you here that was developed and created. So we're asking teachers to just really be very clear on filling out some very general information regarding the Canvas page. How do you contact me? A Zoom link, response times, just filling out some of these pieces just where you can get the syllabus, module information, how students will learn online, expectations for online coursework. So there's some consistency in terms of what students will be receiving. And then this was the work that was done again over the summer, and there was PD offered with our teachers on setting up their Canvas courses and just being consistent in what course information are we providing for our students, course content, what should that look like, how do we communicate and collaborate using Canvas, how do we give it what type of assessment and feedback. We think feedback's incredibly important, and the types of assessment, certainly they're going to look a little bit different being remote. And then, course accessibility, just some information regarding accommodations, and just other pieces of information in there that will really benefit and help our students navigate from class to class using Canvas.
Sure. Let me go a little more into grading, because I know that's one of the biggest questions people have. So as I said, kind of normal grading and abnormal times, and then really thinking about how do we adjust this to be effective during a hybrid or a remote setting. So really an emphasis on feedback, knowing that obviously we're giving feedback to students all the time when you're in a regular classroom, that there is a different challenge to that when you're remote or hybrid. So how do we make sure we emphasize that and give the students the feedback they need so they can make sure they're learning and doing well. Recognizing just the whole situation that families are going through and students are struggling with at times. So how can we be flexible and compassionate as we decide what is going to be the policy if a student's having a hard time engaging, if they have some late work, etc. So we'll be working through that. And then really emphasizing that grading should be done on their knowledge and their growth, their learning, and not looking at maybe all of their behaviors. And so let's emphasize how is this student really growing? How are they doing in this class? How much math do they know, so to speak? And then we have practices like I talked about for assessments and things that just don't translate as well to a remote or hybrid setting, and which one of those have to be adjusted. Our course committees have done some great work talking through what does it mean to make some adjustments so we have some consistency, but also that we're learning from each other as we all go through this for the first time.
So in our opening, we talked about really the importance of extracurricular, and I think that piece has a lot to do with, we know our kids love school, but we also know that our kids are connected by school, by social, and different things that get them up in the morning because they want to be a part of a bigger and broader community of New Trier. And so the extracurricular programs, really important. We've talked a lot with our club sponsor, staff, our obviously athletics, performing arts, just making sure that we want to have students be able to participate in an extracurricular program as much as possible. And so we're looking at having students come on campus for that program, and it would be dependent upon the program and the need for coming on campus. But and we have procedures set up for that, which I'll share with you shortly here. But clubs and programs are going to come in after school. They could be meeting on weekends, again, dependent on the activity. We just shared out our extracurricular safety guidelines with all sponsors and coaches. That will be shared with our students as well. And part of kids coming on campus will be a collection and monitoring of a health screening. We've been doing that already with our summer programs and the fall, Lanyap and some others. We'll continue to do that. Part of this pandemic, really in contact tracing, is going to limit our ability for our students to have some of those outside school experiences. Valuable that we know. It's very important that we think about that in terms of what more exposure are putting our kids in. So this idea of our local and out-of-state trips will really not be taking place. There are some sanctioned IHSA athletic events that are staying actually very local too. So our athletic fall sports, they've shifted. Some of you may know with the extracurriculars, the state has shifted some of those sports to the summer, and some of the spectator involving those extracurriculars, there's still some discussion about that, but there is a necessary to restrict the numbers of spectators that could be a part of those sporting events based on indoor or outdoor for each event. And athletics has more specific information that they're posting on their website. So I mentioned the extracurricular. So what we have here, and this is just the front of our website here, but if a group is coming on campus after school, small group, let's say a club is asking some kids to come in, we're asking our parents would go onto the front of the website here, and they would be clicking on this daily health screening form, and parents will look at that. There's guidelines on there, and then there's a questionnaire form, and the questionnaire form must be completed, and there are questions on there regarding the student's health. And once that's completed and there are no yeses on the form, which we'll talk a little bit more about, then you'll get a receipt, and then that student then would show that receipt to their sponsor that says that they're cleared and they're able to come onto campus. So we have processes in place that will allow for us to know not only that they're coming on campus, where they're on campus, and that also identifies to our PPS what needs to be cleaned. It also helps us with our contact tracing. We know what that student, where they were, and with what other students were they with. And so it's just all part of the collection of data that we're doing to ensure that that in case we need to understand who is with what student, we can do that very easily. And that's all in conjunction with our nurse and the staff in that office. So here's a copy of the daily health screen. So this is just a form that you clicked on that front website. There's some questions you're going to answer. Of course, it goes into, as I said, a little bit more about where the student's going to be, with what sponsor. And then once they get, once this is completed, there's a receipt that comes, and that's what you would show to the coach or sponsor that says that they're clear to come. We will be moving, once we are bringing kids back into the school, we will be moving to an actual, RUVNA is a program that we have. It's a daily health screening. And what's nice about this is that parents have an option to get a text or an email that would come in the morning. and they would answer the questions. And depending on what the questions are, if you answer again no, you would get an approval. And then this particular QR code is given to the parent, and then the parent forwards it to the student. And then that is the student's access to get into the building. And so once we go from remote to hybrid, this would be the new process. So we'll talk more about that and definitely share this as we get into planning for transition to the hybrid. And then social marketing. So one of the things that we're doing here at New Trier is we are really asking our students to take up responsibility for caring for themselves and one another, as well as our staff. And so part of what we're doing is we put together, Paul and I have a Principals Canvas course page that we're asking kids to go through a course that talks about COVID, information regarding the safety guidelines. Then it has information about, prevention efforts, and just understanding what is COVID, what are the symptoms, and then guidelines. What are the expectations for our students when they're on our campus? And what are we asking them to do when they are coming and going from the campus as well? And just, understanding, educating ourselves on the spread, and then adhering to the extracurricular guidelines. And I'll show you a quick sample. So this is, so we have a Canvas course, and our students will be receiving this sometime next week, where the students will go through a course. They're going to take a pledge that we have, where we're asking them that they will pledge to be responsible to themselves and to one another. And then we'll also have a short video that will give them an idea of what the campus looks like now, knowing that we have added some different types of signage and just some expectations for kids. What is it like to be in the building now? Because things are going to look different, which we'll get into here when we get to signage. And so, Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about our contact tracing that we're doing?
Yeah, so one of the things that's going to be very important as students start attendance, and this is true during remote as well as during the hybrid portion of our ladder, is that it's really important that we have good information and stay in contact with families. Whenever there's the possibility that someone has tested positive for COVID or has been diagnosed for COVID, or if someone's traveled to one of the areas that's listed by Cook County as being a high-risk area for travel. So sort of reading this chart from left to right, then if you travel to one of those states that the Cook County Department of Public Health has added to their list of high-risk areas, and you're in that state for 24 hours or more, when you return to Illinois, you really need to quarantine for 14 days. That is important because it contributes to making sure that if by any chance you did contract COVID while you were out of the state, we can keep that as quarantined as possible and make sure that as many of our other families and students stay healthy. If we get a report that someone has in fact tested positive for COVID, then the first step we need to do is really identify with Cook County Department of Public Health who is on the list of individuals who've been within close contact. So Cook County Department of Public Health defines close contact as being within 6 feet of someone for 15 or more minutes. And New Trier and Cook County will work together then to work through that list of individuals who will need to be contacted and will need to quarantine for 14 days and may also need to get testing, depending on sort of the individual specifics of the case. In order to return back to school, you're going to need to be cleared, and you can be cleared either by Cook County Department of Public Health, or you can be have a physician's note letting them know that us know that you are symptom-free, that you haven't, that there's no reason for you to remain in quarantine. If we have a confirmed case, that person needs to actually isolate at home. And so isolation is different from quarantine. Quarantine means you need to stay at your home and not leave your home. Isolation means they need to be as separated from as any other person as you possibly can. So that might mean, you know, trying to stay away from family members in your own home. But in isolation then for at least 10 days, there's going to need to be a recognition from Cook County Department of Public Health that that you're clear to return. Doctors know there's going to be testing involved in order to come back into school. In each one of these cases, when you're quarantining or in isolation, you can still participate in class, because as long as you're well enough to actually be online, you can participate in your classes remotely, whether we're in the remote phase or we're in the hybrid phase. And so there is a real flexibility here for students who might need to take some time to make sure that they're addressing their health, or making sure that they're keeping themselves and others healthy. And so this is one of the real challenges then that we have in our hybrid and model and our ladder to reopening. So in conversations with Cook County then, if we had one positive case of a student, for example, we have to go through then and contact trace every other student who might have been in contact with that student. That means kids who might have been in contact during advisory room, every one of the class periods, if we're in the hybrid model, anyone they've been in contact with outside of school, any staff members that they've been in close contact with, potentially that can add up to be a pretty large number of people who have to quarantine for 14 days. And you can sort of, this chart kind of gives some sense of what are the numbers that could be involved if we had one positive student case or one positive teacher case. Cook County has, in the last week, also made it clear that, Illinois Department of Public Health has made it clear in the last week that if there are 2 cases in a school, they're going to be taking a closer look to see if there is, in fact, an outbreak happening at that school, and whether or not that school is going to have to take a more drastic step to try and address COVID in the school, which could include the entire school shutting down for 14 days. So managing the health, making sure that we're doing what we can as a community to really protect the community from COVID, also then makes schooling a little more complicated for us. And it's likely that as we go through the school year, we're going to have kids going in and out of quarantine. And the school's going to do everything they can to kind of work with families to make sure that students are well supported and connected into the program while they're doing that. I think we can go to the next slide. So this is the most recent chart. So the Illinois Department of Public Health publishes a chart on a pretty regular basis that just kind of gives their exclusion guidance. And you can see that they've divided this into categories. You know, has there been a confirmed case with a positive test? Is there someone who has all the symptoms of COVID, or has some of the symptoms of COVID, but has a negative test, and so forth as you move across the chart? And you can see that there are different procedures for each one of these instances. But the most important theme that runs through this entire chart is, if you have any of the symptoms, you need to remain at home. It's really important that our students and staff who have any of the symptoms associated with COVID stay at home. We'll work with you to help you understand when it is safe to come back to school. During remote learning, this is good advice for how you need to address kind of quarantining. You know, if you have one of these symptoms, you really need to quarantine yourself. You need to stay at home, try to avoid contact with other people until you're doing better. It may be that you need to seek a doctor, reach out to your primary care physician and consult with them, and possibly get tested. But, you know, we want to keep our families safe and healthy during this time as well. And so testing, you know, this is one of the questions that I think we get a lot. Paul, did you want to talk about this, or do you?
Yeah, you go back to the previous slide for a second, then I'll talk a little bit about testing, but then Tim jump in. Mm-hmm. So I just want everyone to understand that this guidance is changing quite often. and that we are continually adapting our plans to the guidance that's changing. So the quarantining guidance has changed along in the past couple of days, as well as in the past weeks. So we are trying to work as hard as we can to get this nailed down with the Illinois Department of Public Health and Cook County Department of Public Health. We're working with them as closely as we can because as these plans change, it impacts our overall plan and our ability to stay open and have as much in-person learning as possible. So I want you to know that we're watching this carefully. But it is a little bit of a moving target in the past a little bit. So if you go to the testing slide now, yeah, testing is a big issue, and certainly I wish we were in a different place where with testing and its availability and the like. It's an important part of trying to keep all of us safe and understanding what's going on with the virus. As you can see on the previous page, and Tim talked about, it is part of the quarantine plan. In certain instances, you really need to get a test, and that will help to inform what the next steps of that are, as Tim talked about. One of the things that is guidance that we're being given is, of course, testing turnaround time, as we all know, is really important. And I think that as of now, the testing turnaround time in our area is mixed. Some, I've heard cases of some that have happened very quickly and others that have taken a while. But we are working and in touch with our local healthcare providers and hospitals, talking about what the status is and how to make this happen in the best possible way for our community members, because we will, and we have, and people have needed to get tested in order to figure out what the next step is. So I just want you to know that while we don't have answers, we certainly are working actively to try and make sure that we're doing what we can to make that a process that works for our families and our students. You know, the future of testing, certainly we've all heard about a lot of plans in which some of the universities, U of I is a good example, that's doing a great deal of testing in order to keep their staff and their community and their students safe. And they have developed a whole plan down in their medical school and their research facilities to do that. And I just want everybody to know we are engaging in those conversations with the people that are creating that, and they're engaging with us in conversation, and so we're thankful for that. But they do have a lot of work in terms of really initiating this plan at University of Illinois, and our hope is that at some point a plan like that is available in our community through the school or elsewhere, so that we can test more consistently. But again, there's certainly developments on testing. FDA is approving certain types of tests. It's all perhaps going in the right direction, and we will take advantage of those things as we can to keep our community safe. Tim, is there anything else on that?
Yeah, I guess I would just sort of summarize the last few set of slides as saying the simple version is, if you have any of the symptoms that are related to COVID, please contact your primary care physician right away. Find out whether or not you need to be tested. And if it comes back a positive, do what you can to isolate and quarantine, because I think it is one of the key factors that's going to help us move along the reopening ladder, is the overall rate of COVID in our community. And so we want to keep it as low as possible. So one of the things that, is this, Paul, are you going to talk about this?
Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, so new attendance. So we are, one of the things that we also need to do to try and make sure that we have a good sense of the overall health of our students in the community is we are centralizing our attendance. And so in the past, you would have contacted your advisor and let them know that you were going to be absent for the day. What we're doing now is we're moving to a centralized system where you can submit a form to let us know that there's been an absence, or to call one of two numbers to report an absence for your child. And the reason for that is that we need to start collecting more information about symptoms. And so if someone's ill, we need to have an understanding of what symptoms that person might have that are keeping them at home. And it's also important to know that absences are a little bit different during remote learning and hybrid learning. So an absence really is an indication that you cannot participate in learning. So during remote learning, students may feel a little under the weather, but say, well, I'm still going to participate online. That's absolutely fine. Once we get to hybrid learning, saying I don't feel well means that you really need to stay at home and participate in remote learning. You shouldn't come to school, but those students are still in attendance. They're still participating in their classes. Absences really mean I'm really too sick, or there's something else happening. I have a family emergency I need to deal with. And that means I can't be in attendance in class.
Thank you. I want to share some of our signs. Waechtler, sorry. You're on mute.
Good call. Both services, Denise and I have gone through and worked with our physical plant services staff and walked the building and decided what signage is going to help communicate what we need and expect from students and our staff while they're on campus. So we have many hundreds or thousands of signs, quite frankly, that we've ordered. And here's some of the main ones. So on the very left-hand side, you can see just kind of a general sign that we'll have throughout the campus and in classrooms of our expectations for social distancing, face covering, avoid touching your face, things like that. We have stairwells that we'll do. Some will be up, some will be down, depending on where they're situated. Some will have to be both, just based on the way the campus is designed. But we will do that. We have a queuing thing for different ones. So, social distance, please stand here in different places. So if somebody's waiting to use something or waiting to go into a certain space, we will be able to queue them up appropriately distanced. Elevator capacity ones, we have room capacity ones for classrooms. And then all of the hallways have these keep right signs and arrows to show you how you can navigate the campus and stay socially distanced as you do that between passing periods. And then all of our rooms have do not sit here for desks to make sure that the only desks that are used are ones that will be socially distanced. And so that's kind of the big parts of the signage.
So Tim, before you begin this part, I think, one of the things that, we know is that we learned last spring is that the remote learning was really challenging for many of our kids. And I can't help but look at a lot of the questions that are coming up that are asking how rigor and how we're going to make sure kids are getting all the curriculum. And it's that balance. It's that balance between understanding, knowing the challenges of remote learning for kids, just being able to connect, get the content, and then the isolation. So, we've spent a lot of time on really thinking about addressing the social emotional learning and supports for our kids as we move into the fall. So I'll let you just go ahead and touch on this.
Yeah, there are a number of reports that have come out just in the last week even that have really pointed to the last few months and the real increase in mental health issues for adolescents. And so we're obviously paying close attention to that and really want to watch carefully as our students engage at the beginning of the school year to see who needs additional support. For all of our students, we really want to emphasize the kinds of safety pieces that we have in place for our students, ways that kids can let us know when they're concerned about a classmate, like the Trevian tip line, for example. But we also want to do more to really work with students through our KW curriculum to really emphasize topics that are related to SEL, mental health, for example. In our advisor rooms, a really important component of the advisor room and our classroom experiences is going to be building communities, because when kids are connected to one another, they're more resilient, and it's easier for us to know when they might need some additional supports. And then we've really worked to try and use a piece of software called Bookings to improve our ability to get kids connected into our services like social work and health services, post-high school counseling, some of our support areas, so that they can actually go and sign up for a time and make an appointment to actually access these services so that we can better meet their needs. And I think you're right, Denise. I think there's a way in which it might feel like, well, you know, they're still at home and they're on their computer screen, and that looks pretty much like it does when they're doing things like playing video games or hanging out with one another. But it is a different thing to be in class, and I think as adults we know that, right? As we've worked through remote, we've done our work remotely, we've experienced the kind of sometimes unique stresses that come with trying to do that through something like Zoom, or just being online for long hours at a time, trying to manage that. And so there are a lot of things that I think parents can do to try and make the routine as supportive as possible. Having regular wake up and bedtimes, setting periods and places aside for studying and learning, and then other places that are really for relaxing and having some free time, sticking to an exercise schedule, sleep and nutrition, really doing, you know, I've heard of some students who really have taken this time to take up things like meditation, or they've downloaded one of the apps like Headspace or Calm or something like that to really kind of engage in some self-care strategies. It's a really stressful, unsettling time. I think kids, I know my kids at home talk about that. Things are just not normal. And when they're not normal, it can really develop a lot of anxiety in kids. And so spending time together as a family is really important, of course, and finding times to just, you know, laugh together, have some fun together, making sure that there are those times for them to kind of let go of some of that stress is important.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to talk a little bit, Waechtler, about the academic support?
Sure. So we understand that students obviously need to get academic support, even in remote learning. We would certainly suggest that the best place to start is with your classroom teacher. Trying to organize a way to see them and see if they can help you and answer your questions. But we also recognize that schedules don't always allow that. And we do have other things on both campuses. So at the Northfield campus, we have an academic assistance center. We have many tutors in math, biology, physics, some of the languages, English, different ones. And students will be able to access that virtually to get some assistance. And they will be able to do the same on the Winnetka campus. Theirs is a little more broken out, but they have the Reading and Writing Center and Math Resource Room. So again, opportunities for students to get individual help in a setting to just make sure they're keeping up with their coursework. And then both campuses have a GAP program and a guided study program for students who might be struggling or have executive functioning needs. And those are usually programs that we would refer students to after learning about their habits and their struggles as we kind of process through what's going to be the best program to help them with. So there's both individual ones and one that's more on a referral basis. We do have software to make scheduling appointments hopefully pretty streamlined. Recognizing if you're doing this in a remote or hybrid setting, it's not as easy as just walking into a room. And so we're looking at a software program that will make it easy for kids to access this and kind of schedule an appointment with the tutor.
And then, you know, the picture over here, Paul's of our website. So, you know, all this information is here, located under student services, academic support. So just for parents to easily find. And we're almost done. We'll answer. We've got quite a few questions.
Yeah. So this chart is really just to give you a sense of, as we start to, when we get to the point where we're starting to bring students onto campus, you know, who are those students that we will first start to bring onto campus? And you can see the list of students who might be in that first group. You know, there are students who are going to need, through special education, they need educational supports that are that having them in the building allows us to deliver in a way that's going to really support their learning. We also really want to be paying attention to that disengaged wellness check category. So these are kids who during the first few weeks of this year and looking back into the spring who may have also had struggles then as well, to just really engage in remote learning. Some of our students just really had a very, very challenging time doing that, and were just not able to figure out how to get connected in. And so maybe those students would do better coming to school 4 days a week instead of, so that we can actually have them connected with our support services, because they might need some additional support beyond the classroom to just kind of help them manage the other pieces that are impeding their learning.
Right. So right. So looking at, this is the schedule here of the Trevian Blue and the Green Day. Last week we sent schedules out to students, and a simple way to help understand a very complex looking, somewhat identified schedule. Hopefully you were able to work with your student to make sure that they understand their schedule. And so if you have any questions, I noticed there's a question in the chat about a schedule that came without certain days. If you could just email me or Paul Waechtler on one of our campuses, and we can help sort through that particular schedule question. So this is Northfield. So you're looking at Trevian Day 1 through 9. Classes start here. Advisor 8:10 ends at 3:35. And then you have your Blue Day and your Green Day, which are in blocks, 70 minutes. And then period 3 and period 8 both have either a lunch and 2 classes separated somewhere in between these 3 options. And again, that was noted for students to understand which option they have. And then on Green Days, we have an X block. And that X block is opportunities for our students to be able to have certain days where there's programming, which we'll tell them in advance, but also opportunities for staff development. And then, Paul, your schedule at Northfield, very similar, couple differences.
Yeah, really, it's almost the exact same structure, and then everything in Northfield is 20 minutes earlier. And so allowing students, again, hopefully when we have a chance to be on campus, allowing students to commute between the campuses and staff to commute. So we've always been 20 minutes earlier and have maintained that structure. Again, there was a question about what you can see. So on the view, depending on what view you're using, you can usually see that the classes for this week that's coming up. So that's why you only see Wednesday through Friday for this week, because those are the only classes we'll have when we first start school. But in a typical one, you would be able to see the whole range there. And then when we're remote, as you can see during this period 5, say on a Trevian Day, you have different times. And then same with period 3 and 8. It is, when we're remote, obviously we don't need to serve kids lunch on the campus. And so teachers will make sure they're clear when their class is meeting, because they might not need to separate. They might not need to meet for a class, then have lunch, and then come back for a class, which is the one with the 3B lunch or the 8B lunch. But teachers will be very clear on what their expectations are for students and when their class is going to be meeting during those days.
Hey, Paul, am I right that on what you can see, you see the 3 days, because those are the 3 days, right?
Correct.
Wednesday being the Trevian Day schedule.
Correct.
Thursday is a Blue Day and Friday is a Green Day.
So you see
all the different
classes.
versions. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the questions, Paul, that came up was homework and the assignment and scheduling of homework on some of these days. So I'll give you an example. If you're in a Blue Day and you just finished class on a Tuesday.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, on a Tuesday. Then what can they expect for homework, potentially, and assignments that may come to them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So on a Blue Day, so Tuesday would be our typical one. You would likely be assigned homework in your class, and that homework would then be due the next time you meet. So again, typically on a Thursday. It doesn't mean you didn't do any homework, say Tuesday night in that class. You're going to kind of have to make that determination for yourself as a student. But certainly your focus would be your homework for your classes on your green day to make sure you're ready for that. But we're not going to have, say, a teacher have a blue day, assign stuff that's due the next day, even though they're not meeting. So the homework would be due the next time they're actually going to be together as a group. And then the student's going to have to decide how to disperse that. So they could wait, do no homework in that class for an entire day, and then pick it up afterwards.
I promise we're trying to get to some of them in during it, but I want to just do this last one then, Paul, too.
Sure. So this is just the school calendar that's on our website. Just kind of days off and things like that is the first page. And then the heavy color-coded one is the following page. And if you look down at the bottom, there's obviously a little code there to tell you what all the colors mean. But red are days off, and yellow are days for the Trevian days. We have two different colors of blue in case we need to kind of divide up people by a quarter rather than half. So you might be this kind of teal blue would be 25% of the population coming in, and the darker blue and green might be the next 25%. And so those are color coded that way, but they're still blue and green days. The schedules are the exact same for those Tuesdays and those Thursdays. It's just who might be on campus and who might be remote is a way for us to distinguish those. The rest of the colors are for testing days and parent-teacher conferences, other ones that, again, you're probably better off looking at the website than me going through each one. Other than maybe pointing out orange are our district planning days. So those are days without students in attendance. And we have 5 of those kind of sprinkled throughout the year, but more heavy in the early part of the year, as our teachers just need to have time, again, to do their very best with remote learning and hybrid learning.
And then this last one is just where you can find all those calendars on the website under, go on the home calendars, and there they all are. So I think getting to some of the questions here, I think there's some questions on, a lot of questions on just getting kids engaged in extracurricular clubs. I know our activities directors are looking at doing a club day, and that's an opportunity where all the clubs typically would be present in the building, but we're looking at doing it in a way in which it's remote, where kids can sign up to go listen to other students talk about that club. We also are moving to a digital club guide that'll be available on the website, where you can put in your interest, and it'll show what clubs are pertaining to that interest that you might be looking for joining. So we'll be sharing all of that too through the advisor system and sending things out. A lot of information will be coming out in Canvas. That's our main communication source that we'll use with students, where they'll be able to get information on all of these different activities. Then there's another question on just picking up some kits for kids. Paul, you and I talked a little bit about this too, about teachers coordinating. There are some classes that will ask kids to come in and get their kits, that they'll need to be working from home. You want to talk a little bit about how you and I are going to try and coordinate that with leaders?
Sure. So we talked at our leadership teams about there are a variety of materials, maybe a little bit of a science kit or an art kit, or applied arts, some of the hands-on classes, maybe even some supplemental materials for a class, recognizing that if you're Zooming on one device, sometimes it's easier to be able to write on a separate piece of paper or something. So we have a variety of departments that would like to get materials to students. We did this very successfully during our summer school, and the students really appreciated the extra effort and thought it really helped their learning experience. So we also recognize we don't want teachers or departments to do that on their own, and then families have to come to the school 4 or 5 different times for each kid. So we're trying to coordinate it where we'd have a kind of one time and do it alphabetically or break it up. but you would, kind of have a little caravan or whatever. We'd be driving in. You would tell us what your schedule is, and we'd have people who can help get you the supplies that you need, and do that as efficiently as possible to, again, make it as great learning experience for our students, but also make it efficient for families, and do that the best we can.
Paul, Sally, can you share, we've talked about this 10 and 25%, just a little bit how we're determining that. We talked about some decisions regarding the alphabet.
Yeah.
I know we got an email tonight from a student that would prefer we don't use alphabet.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a different system, how they want us to bring kids in, but
I know. We've considered a lot of different systems. So let's start with how we're starting, which is we know that there's a set of students we need to prioritize for in-person learning because they're not able to really access their education in any significant way at home. So some of our special ed students and other students that we've identified and will identify. And so that's our priority as we start to ramp up to bringing students in. They'll be the first students that come in because they are the ones that really need the most attention in this way. And then as we get to the next levels, we needed to come up with a system in which our classrooms were reasonably balanced, and because we could bring in 50% of students or 25% of students, and if it's the wrong 25%, you can't social distance in a classroom. So our administrative services people team did a great job to get the schedule set so that we can bring students in alphabetically and have classrooms throughout the day which are socially distant. So, so that's the method that we used. It will keep students and staff safe in the building. It will keep siblings on the same schedule. So that's why we did that. The decision to ramp up to 25%, again, you've seen the target date. And that we'll send out specific schedules as we get close to that date, so everybody's aware as we start to get into the school year. So we'll give you a few weeks notice in order to just get your schedule set for what that might mean for your family.
So I think there's many groups on both Paul and I's campus that do have different events. Mm-hmm. So music is one of those, and we've been working with the department leaders to talk through, what do those events look like, knowing that we have some restrictions of can't have gathering more than 50. And we also know that some of our groups are larger than 50. So just the actual participants. So looking at ways to be able to, maybe do it through web, that our students might be able to participate, and then spacing that apart, separating kids apart, being able to do a blended where you're videoing some of it and some of it's live, just really trying to be as creative as possible. But the challenge again that we have right now with our restrictions is the number that can gather. So they are all been thinking and thinking a lot over the summer on how we can make sure that our kids get the experience. We just might not be able to bring all our parents in the building to share that experience at one time.
Well, if there's one group that I know is going to be creative, it's our performing arts folks. They will figure it out.
Yeah. Affinity groups, Tim, they're going to still be running. And if so, can you talk a little bit about some of the things we're thinking about for some of our, not only affinity groups, but some of our other specialty groups that meet?
So the short answer is yes, they'll continue to meet. Some of them were holding meetings last spring as well when we were in remote learning then. They'll, just pick a time when they're going to do that, offer out an invitation to students to come and meet them online, and they'll continue to do their meeting. And one of the things we're looking at this year is just expanding out the number of groups that we offer. We have affinity groups, so groups for kids to get together who share a particular identity with one another, and be able to talk with one another and support one another. And then also support groups, so groups for kids who are experiencing you know, a life challenge of one type or another, and can offer support to one another. So we'll do those.
So Paul, so if a parent signed up for hybrid, you know, when we had that questionnaire that we sent out,
Mhm.
they changed to remote sometime during the quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. That type of change is an option for families throughout the quarter. In order for us to track attendance right and to be able to make plans, making that decision, we just ask that you then stick with it through the quarter, and then we'll give everyone who's been in remote an opportunity to say, I'm going to continue in remote, or I'd like to go into hybrid. And again, that depends on what step of the ladder that we're on.
So I think, Tim, this was clarification. I think somebody thought when we were sharing that we may have said that 2 positive cases would lead to a 2-week mandatory shutdown. Can you, you know, can you talk a little bit about maybe that was misheard?
Yeah, let me be clear. So that so what the Illinois Department of Public Health said in the last 24 hours is that if there is a situation where we have 2 positive cases that are epidemiologically linked, it's a difficult word to say. In other words, they're connected in some way. So those 2 kids were somehow in related activities, or they were in the same vicinity of one another, then they will investigate to determine whether or not there has been an outbreak in our school. After that investigation happens, it's possible that we could be asked to do a wide range of things. The most extreme version of that is shutting down the school for 2 weeks, but it could be something else, like asking our, you know, having our extracurricular programs take a pause, or asking students to change the way we've set up lunch, you know, that they have to eat lunch in a different way. But, you know, I think it's important for parents to understand that's where we are. That's what it means to conduct school in a pandemic, is that if we have just even a handful of cases in our school, it can mean that we have to dramatically change how we're doing schooling. So I saw in one of the questions was, well, what is the threshold to go into 100% learning? That's one of the thresholds, is that Cook County Department of Public Health comes and says, you've had